Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nivi Manohar, Global Education Marketing Officer for Study Tasmania. I acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Muvinina people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be participating in this webinar. Before I start, let me just see if I need to admit any more people into the lobby. Yeah, there are a couple. Thank you.
Feel free to turn your video on so we can see your beautiful faces.
I think I'll have to allow them to do that. I'm just, yeah, I'm not sure if I can. Yeah, I think they could. No, I think I'll have to do that myself. So
Okay.
if you need to keep your video on, please raise your hand and I can do that for you. Well, welcome to June's industry webinar on the Tasmanian social work and community services sector. Before we start, I just want to talk a little bit about Study Tasmania. We are the Tasmanian government study body. Our aim is to encourage students around the world to consider Tasmania as their study destination, one that provides world-class education, amenities with vibrant and safe cities, a bustling culture and food scene, and welcoming communities. Along with that, we also provide support for students who are already here, including well-being activities and employability training, of which this webinar series is a part of. We listened to our student cohort a lot and their feedback. And one thing that they told us is that they would like to hear directly from the industry about employment, about what the sector is looking for, where the jobs are at, and what skills to improve on, and so on. And that's how the industry webinar series came to be. And so far, we've had sessions on various sectors that are popular with our international student cohort, like nursing, aged care and disability care, pharmacy, tourism, hospitality, accounting, and so much more. You can actually have a look at that on our website. I'll pop the links, all the links that we're talking about on the chat box. Today, we have with us Brigid Wilkinson, Active Aging Project Officer from COTA, which is Council of Aging Tasmania, who will discuss with us about the various aspects of employability in the community services and social work sector. We also have with us Adrian Shu and Yankee Wang, who are new to the industry and who have just started working. And so it'll be great for them to share their experiences with you. A bit of housekeeping before I pass it on to Brigid. This is a recorded session. I've already started recording. The recording will be available on our website in the next few days in case anyone you know has missed this. Brigid, Adrian, and Yankee will speak for about, say, 20 to 30 minutes, following which you can ask your questions. You can pop them in the chat box and I can bring it up with our speakers. Or if you want to ask them directly, please raise your hands and I can unmute you and have your cameras on if you want. And that's all I have to say. So I'll pass this on to Brigid now. So thanks for joining us this afternoon, Brigid. So could you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name's Brigid Wilkinson. I'm Tasmanian. I was born here and went to school here. And I studied social work when it was available on the Launceston campus only. So I sort of have a little bit of an inkling about what it's like to move from where you live to go and study, and not quite as far as some of you. But I completed my studies in 1999 and then went on to work in a couple of different jobs in youth and disability before I moved over to London. So I now skip a bit. I understand what it's like to move even further away from home in order to pursue my interest, which at that point was hospital social work. And I wanted to go and experience the world, but primarily I really wanted to work in central London and get experience working in really busy hospitals. So I was always very interested in the medical side of things and having a voice for patients and helping to advocate for their needs when they found themselves in crisis or they found themselves in a big life transition, which ended up in a health admission. So I worked in about 4 or 5 different major training hospitals in London and went on to sort of manage teams and create teams, and then my last few years in London was working a little bit more in policy, so redesigning the way that we actually did the service and the way that we actually supported people. I came back to Australia about 10 or 11 years ago back to Tasmania, and kind of just went, what do I want to do next? Wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go back to frontline working with clients and working with communities and things like that. And I actually saw a job advert to work at the university and had never thought about working for the university ever. I don't think anyone puts social work and university apart from teaching, being an academic. And there was a job there called a careers educator. And I've always been, as a lot of social workers are, or people that work with people, really curious about why people think the way that they think. And I read the job description and thought, wow, this is about helping people navigate like their life and what they want to do next and how are they going to use their studies and their personality and that sort of thing. So I went for the job and I got it. Now, it didn't say it needed to be a social worker at all. There was actually no discipline that it said, but you had to obviously have skills of working with people. My counselling background helped as well. And I went on and did that for about 5 or 6 years and absolutely loved it. So I supported students from every single kind of degree qualification through to PhD and researchers to understand how to market themselves, to apply for jobs, to even understand what they even want. And sometimes that meant dropping out of uni or study because it really wasn't what they wanted. And other times it was because, they needed support with applications for scholarships or jobs, etc. Did a lot of mock interview training, which I loved as well. And then I went on to go and join the social work school, which is where I met these lovely people as former students, and started to support the students in preparing for their fieldwork placement. So in the social work course, some of you might be thinking to do that, or you might be studying a TAFE pathway or a different sort of degree qualification or learning around aged care or disability. But in social work, our students have to do 2 500-hour placements. And so my job was to work with the community service organisations out there, which again was great because I was always curious about who did what and how it was funded and what help it provided, and get really good relationships, and then support students to think ahead and prepare for going out into that workplace, and then supporting them while they were there on placement and ensuring that they had the support and the guidance to effectively learn the skills on the job and then to ultimately pass their placement and pass their degree. So that was wonderful and fabulous, and really loved it. So I had 10 years altogether. But my passion, again, I keep going back to the jobs that I had initially in social work in the hospital system. And I worked a lot with the over 65 year age bracket and their families, and felt very strongly about advocating in that space. I felt that older people didn't get treated with the same respect or care or the same voice. And so the job that I do now is doing that. So I now have moved away from working with people directly again and working more at a higher level, I guess, more policy and community engagement. So I'm not working one-on-one therapeutically with people at all anymore, but I'm working more with councils and community groups and governments to think about what it is we need to do to plan for our ageing demographic, the kind of issues that come up for them, and how can we help older people in Tasmania stay connected and engaged in their community and be seen as a real contributor to community. So it sort of comes back again to that social justice aspect that you learn in those social work and community sector. And that keeps me fired up. I think a lot of us stay in these jobs because we get really fired up about inequalities, and that's what led us to be here. So that's what I'm doing now. Couple of different qualifications along the way, and that's what you'll find too. You're never going to stop learning. You're going to probably navigate and grow and change and get different qualifications under your belt along the way as well.
Right. Thank you.
That's me.
Thank you. Just to follow up, like I wanted to ask about Adrian and Yankee as well, quickly about what you've studied and where you are at right now.
Go, Adrian.
Oh, hey everyone. Thank you. So my name is Adrian. I'm a social work. I used to be a social work student. So I was so like Brigid has mentioned before, when Brigid doing her field officer role with UTAS, I was one of her students. So I did my master social work qualifying in UTAS for 2 years. Just graduated last year. I started my work just in the middle of my second placement with the Drug Education Network in Hobart. I worked there for about 7 months, and then as a technical service administration support, and then I moved on to be a frontline worker, like a housing connect worker, assessing people housing needs and assisting them in public housing application, referring to shelters or any crisis transitional accommodation. I've been with Colony for around the same time as well. So I worked 2 jobs at once with the Den and Colony 47, and moved on to my new role in Department of Communities Tasmania. So my current role right now is like program officer, just managing head leases with different housing providers, and doing some answering some constituent requests. So it's not really a frontline work anymore, but it's more like back of house. But we always try to. It's more like a policy side of it, and making sure that the performance of housing providers are up to par, like up to the standard. All KPIs are satisfied, and the renewal of the funding for the next year. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Like yeah, so far.
Thanks, Adrian. And I might just plug in here that Adrian was one of Study Tasmania's student ambassadors from last year. So we're really happy to have you here. Join us from in this new role, Adrian. Thank you. And over to you, Yankee.
Okay, I don't know where to start, but like, so I'm from China originally, and my initial background was in politics, and then I worked as a journalist for a while, and then I decided I want to try Australia because it's different, and I want to try to like explore what I would like to do, and then I realized, okay, I'm an art student and I'm not good at math, so probably I couldn't do business or like accounting, that sort of thing. And I was like, okay, I think I'm a talker, so maybe social work, you can just use your people skills, communication skills to kind of help people navigate through some like difficult times in their life. So that's how I made the decision to do a social work degree here at UTAS. And I did my placement, the first placement was with UTAS Sustainability, where I kind of did a research project about like the benefits of community food gardens on like mental and social well-being for university students. And then I did my second placement with Care, their mental health team. So we were a bit unlucky because that was in 2020 during COVID outbreak. So our last placement was online, but it was still very interesting. We did a project about trauma-informed care practice and also like care farms around those kind of topics. And then after graduated, I was like looking for jobs, and I was like, okay, I know it's really hard to get my first job out of the university, so I would just be open to any job offer. So and then I got my first job as a like support worker at Relationships Australia Children's Contact Center in Launceston. So back then I was like, okay, I'll just go with the job first and see how it goes. And then so I moved to Launceston and worked my way up to the office and then as a case manager. So at the Children's Contact Center, what we do is like we supported family going through separation and family law courts to help them sort of set up like contact arrangement for their children, and or like parents help them, support them to like set up like parenting agreements sometimes as well. So, and also what's the most important thing is like in that process we try to kind of like advocate for the children for their well-being, especially when sometimes like the parents are very like heightened and trying to like get more parenting rights compared with the other parent, but sometimes they tend to forget okay, you need to consider what the children want and what they need as well. So try not to traumatize them in that process. So yeah, and then I did that for a bit, but then I wanted to move back to Hobart because in Launceston, although I enjoy what I do, but I feel it's a bit hard when you don't have a supportive network around you, especially when you're working as a social worker. So I found that a bit hard for me because I don't have lots of friends in Launceston. So I feel like for my own self-care, for my own well-being, I feel I would like to return to Hobart just to be close to my friends and support persons. So I think that's something probably for international students when you thinking about your career options in Australia, you probably also want to consider that as well, because social work jobs can be really sometimes stressful, and you do feel like you need that kind of space and people around you that can help you debrief a little bit. That's really, really important. So that's why I decided I want to move back to Hobart, and then I started to apply for jobs, and now I started my current job like about 1 month ago. So currently I'm a social worker with the Department of Health here at Repath Hospital. I'm mainly working with geriatric and palliative patients, just help with the discharge planning and help people kind of navigate through the process of moving into aged care or trying to get support packages when they want to return home. So yeah, that's everything about me.
Great. Thank you so much, Yankee. My question for you, Brigid, is could you please tell me about like how welcoming is the sector to international students, and what are the opportunities to grow within the space?
Yeah, I think you've just heard right there that these two bright sparks have got jobs with the government. So I would say that when I first started doing career guidance 10 years ago, that wasn't happening. It really wasn't. And not just in social work, in accounting, in IT, in lots of areas. I think that there's been a big shift, and I think that there's a big acceptance of diversity, more so now than what there has been in the past across lots of different industries. But I think also don't forget that in social work or community sector, we work with a really diverse group of people and clients from very diverse backgrounds. And so usually the sector is exceptionally inclusive because of that. We're already used to working with and for people that are from marginal, marginal areas and different diversity and things. So there is, I think, a little bit more of an acceptance of difference and about acknowledging and supporting difference. So I think I definitely have seen it change in the last 10 years for sure. And the outcomes that I hear, and these two are the only two, but in the last couple of years, the students that have come back to me, or now I actually interact with in my job, because they're doing jobs in another industry where I'm collaborating and things. I keep hearing really good positive stories from our international students that have graduated, and I'm sure these guys will probably be more in touch with some of the most recent ones. But I definitely do think that the social work and community sector, aged care, disability are very inclusive in terms of an industry as a whole. Yeah, and there's lots of nods going on there. So obviously that's your lived experience as well there, Yangshi and Adrian.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Could I add something? Yeah,
yes, of course.
Because what I notice is compared with other sectors, so social work and community industries, when people looking for recruitment, they don't really mind if you are already a permanent resident or not, because I know for banking or accounting, sometimes they give preference to people already got the permanent residency or citizenship. But for social work industry, from my own experience, it's as long as you have legal rights to work here, they wouldn't discriminate against that.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. And Brigid, another question for you. There are some there's so many such a varied kind of job outcomes that you can get from being a student in social services and social work. But are there anything that the students should look out for that is probably not getting as much attention? Any job outcomes?
In terms of job areas,
job areas. Yes, that's right.
Growth areas. Yeah, I think it depends. I think no matter what the area is, I think you just have to do exactly what Adrian, or I think it was Adrian or actually just said, go for an opportunity, whether it's actually what you want to do eventually or not, because you need to make networks. You absolutely need to make networks. A lot of graduates that I've known have started off doing disability support work, and some of them will say to me, but hold on, I've got a social work degree and I'm doing disability support work. Well, actually, I didn't necessarily do what I trained to do straight up either. So I think you have to maybe change and shift your mindset that there are great jobs out there that might not be titled an aged care worker or whatever, if you've done your Cert 3 in individual support or you've done your social work or whatever it is. But it's about always that first job is the job that gets your foot in the door somewhere. I would say absolutely aged care and disability support under the NDIS are huge employers, and there are new providers popping up every day. I can't keep up with the aged care providers. They are just constantly setting up shop and same in the NDIS space. Yes. And I think that those areas are really, really good for helping enhance your ability to have an interpersonal relationship with someone. Working individually as a support worker gives you a really good insight of the lived experience of what it's like to live with a disability or to be an older person that struggles to navigate physically the world or whatever it might be. And it helps you have a lot of empathy, so that then if you do move on to other roles like we have as social work professionals around case management or supporting them in decision making and things, you've got a really good understanding of what life is like day to day for people, and you've developed that ability to communicate. If you want to work with people, then you have to be able to relate and you have to be able to read them and to be able to understand what they're going through. And some of those jobs in individual support and things, I think, can be really good starting blocks for social workers, for sure. Yeah, so definitely aged care. The other thing is entrepreneurship and enterprise. Don't think that because you're studying social work, you can't go and set your own business up, or you can't, you know, in lots of different things. And there's a big movement too in what we call green social work. So being really aware of climate change and the impact that is happening on the environment for people, and what the impact is for natural disasters. That's another really big area. So there's a lot more jobs coming out in the bushfire recovery, in the climate sort of change and preparedness. So even a month ago, Red Cross put some jobs out for the east coast of Tasmania for someone to work there for 2 years to just prepare the community for natural disasters. And they were looking for social work because you've got those people skills with those strategic ability to look at systems and look at problems. So I think outside the box. There's some really great opportunities.
Great, thank you. So that's another segue from what you were just saying just before. Like, I just want to know, like, what are some of the skills and qualities that employers are looking for in candidates? Like, who would you say is the ideal fit?
Hey, I'm going to throw to you too, because you've just recently had job interviews. What did you get as a question in a job interview that related to a particular skill? And this is the thing, is that it might not necessarily be about the degree you've studied. It could actually be about a more transferable employability skill. But hey guys, what did you get asked in your interview that you've been asked several times? You've both gone for interviews in the last couple of months and year. You've been for a fair few. What are the things you keep getting asked? Yangshi, what about you?
I think one thing they always ask is about your ability to prioritize tasks, time management, because as social worker, you have like all sorts of like things you need to do, and how you decide which is more important, which is less urgent, that sort of things. I think people tend to ask that question a lot, and also about your like people skills, how you in general dealing with like crisis, emergency, like kind of, or like heightened people, or like how do you support people in that kind of situation. So normally it will come as like a scenario, like you might get asked like specific situation in a hospital setting, or like in a like children's contact center settings. But like sometimes you those just like think about what kind of skills are transferable in different settings. Like for example, when I did my interview with the hospital, I had no experience working in a medical setting. I didn't have any clue about like medical terminologies or things like that. How the medical side of the world, like how they work, I didn't know. But what I did is like really come down to your core skills. What are your like strengths? What are your core skills? It could come to case management, which is like transferable, and also people skills, and like how you de-escalate situations, that sort of thing. Just like go back to like I would recommend you just get like blank piece of paper, just write down what are your 5 core skills, and how trying to get some examples how you demonstrate that skills in your day-to-day work. And I'm sure the employers, they love to hear those stories. Yeah.
About you, Adrian?
I agree with Yankee. A lot of time they're trying to ask questions relating to interpersonal skills. For example, Yankee mentioned about de-escalations, and also the ability to prioritize tasks. Just like Yankee also said that even though she hasn't worked in a hospital, she didn't work in a hospital before, but it's really beneficial to show that you have past experience in working in a pressure environment, and you know like what to prioritize and what can wait for a later date. Also, one thing I want to add on is that when I did my course with UTAS, I thought all the frameworks and the theories was kind of like not really relevant when it comes to practice, but they actually are. So in my colony for the 7 interview, they actually asked like, so which framework or which theory for social work or community work do you mostly rely on? And they give me a few hypothetical questions, situational question, and say, oh, can you please try and do like provide your application to these cases? Because most of the time, it's not just like frameworks and theories guide us to work for our best practice, but also in some cases where there are like legal implications, it's also protect us. Like if the matter is bring to court or anything, we can provide rationale why we did it in that way. So it's really important as well. For I think for my job at the moment, which is the last interview I went to, most of the things they ask for are pretty much transferable skill for an admin person. So yeah, being able to provide tasks, time management, work in a group, especially work in a group, because it's not just like we're doing one-on-one, but sometimes we work in community sector. A lot of time we rely on other people from different disciplines, and it's always best to know who we work with, work with those people with respect, and we understand that everyone work as a collective with each individual strength. And some of us may have medical background, some of us don't, but we all contribute in a different way. Yeah.
And I'll add 2 things if I can. One, I think it's for every industry, but even more and more, and now I work more on that more systemic advocacy area, is being someone that can be really creative and critical in the way that you think through a problem. Because when you work in the community sector, the biggest issue always is resources. The biggest issue always is funding, and convincing a government that the service that you provide is needed in the community, and B, it's having an impact and people are having a better life because they've been able to get a support or a service off you. So having individuals that can think outside the box and actually be creative in how you might go for different bits of funding or how you actually run your service so that you can actually, you know, convince somebody to fund you, I think is really important. So equally, being creative and inquisitive when you work with clients is great, because you play to their strengths and you can work at a pace that's good for them. But I think when you're thinking that bigger picture, which is what you do need to think if you want a career in social work, how are you going to show your impact? And the other one is passion. So we've talked a lot about these transferable skills, and yes, you could go and work in an accounting firm with all these accounting skills. You could go and work in hospitality with all these transferable skills. But to work in social work, I think you have to have passion and you have to have hope, because we work with injustice all the time. And that might be an individual's behaviour. It might be a system and a policy that's not giving the community what they need. It might be that massive divide between the haves and the have-nots, which is creating a huge issue for people in the community. And so you actually have to have a lot of passion to want to kind of almost fight the battle of these sort of inequalities. So I do think passion and hope is a really big one as well.
Great, thank you. Thanks, all of you. I have another question that I'm going to throw to Adrian and Yangshi here. You can talk from your own experience or experience of your friends who are studying or you're working with. And also Brigid, you can also answer this question, of course, with your experience. What are some of the challenges that international students they face in work settings? Are there like any particular challenges that they have, or are there any misconceptions about the sector that you'd like to clarify? Yangshi, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing I noticed is that, like, as international students, sometimes it's more easily for ourselves to be self-criticized. We see our shortcomings because we're not native speakers. We don't know much about like Australian society, and also like, you know, you just out of university, so you always tend to see what you don't have. But sometimes if you reflect on your experience, or like you say that sometimes it can be strange. Like, for example, I remember in my hospital interview, I talk about, because I'm not native speaker, I know the feeling of like you don't understand what people are talking about. Like, you know, those lingos, like terminology people use, like how that feel to don't understand that. So I think if you're working with clients, you need to, you know, you ensure you use plain language, you use easy language for them to understand. I think like this is our unique strength. And also things like, yeah, I guess, and also like I guess the experience you have moving to a different country, put yourself into a new social environment and try to figure out everything, and like those kind of experience kind of help you understand for people who are from a more like disadvantaged background. And I think those are very, very like valuable experience and like reflections when you are working in that sector. I think just like sometimes just be confident, like know like you are nothing like shorter than other people. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Adrian, would you like to add to that?
I think it's really pretty well covered. Like, yeah, when I first started as well, I think I have a lot of like over criticism of myself, not being enough with language skills and English and all that stuff. But after a while, I think it's like the main point of communication is to be clear and to be concise. And we also work with people who identify not having such a high literacy level. So it's always best to keep everything really plain and clear. And yeah, I mean, for me, when I first started, I felt a lot of pressure, like, oh, what if I graduate and I can't find a job after a few months after graduation, that kind of thing, because I don't have full work rights as an international student. But I guess I really treasure and appreciate the support that UTAS arranged for the placement to happen like twice in my degree, and it was a really great quick kickstart for me to build my connection. I guess the same thing is happening within TAFE community as well. Like you guys also have placements. Yeah, just so make use of that, because I think when you're an intern, like your mentor would not expect much because that this is your first internship, your first placement. Take the most time out, make the most out of it, trying to learn and be really confident of yourself. I guess, yeah, trying to show that you can do attitude. So you have good reference, and it can open doors for you later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brigid, I'd like to just have a follow-up question about what they spoke about, especially around communications and like English. So are there like any resources that, international students can access, to improve their communication, improve their vocabulary, and especially how we actually spoke about lingo. That's something that everyone struggles with here So are there like any resources that they can access?
Yeah, so I guess I speak from a UTAS perspective. Obviously, I know some students on the call are from a TAFE sector or from an institute, but UTAS definitely does. So we have, well, first of all, we have a careers service. So people like myself helping support people even understand how to even put an application together, let alone how to then confidently speak. We have language, support around language as well. And international students also can participate in heaps of activities on campus to get to know people. I think for me, it's about the everyday language, because that's one of the things students always used to say to me, was that they just want to practice their English. And so in order to do that, you need to get involved in things, which is really hard when you're on your own and you don't know anyone. But if you're studying, then there's going to be some kind of community around you, whether that's UTAS or TAFE. There's going to be some kind of network of activities, even if it's sport, or getting involved in volunteering is another big thing. Yeah. So volunteering and finding a local group, or I had a lot of students do like Rotarians, which is public speaking, and they're international students, and they would go there and get all this support from local Tasmanians in public speaking, or they'd go to the library and join an English literacy group, or they'd go and start playing basketball, and they would meet people, and they found that their language would improve by being around other local, domestic students or Tasmanian businesses and organisations, where they were then learning that lingo. And I do recall an international student who used to live on campus once telling me that they got so confused because the Australian students were saying they were going to have a Barbie and come to this Barbie, and all they knew Barbie was the doll, the doll. And so they kept saying, why do they keep saying come out to the lawns and we'll have a Barbie? Like does everyone bring their dolls out? And it was a really good time to be able to say to those students, have you noticed how you expect international students to just know what you're talking about? You need to do some learning here too. So that ended up being a really great, and actually some of my students were involved in that on placement there, and they ended up coming up with a lingo guide, which was amazing, to help the international students feel way more welcome in that accommodation space. Because I think we have to challenge us locals, like us native speakers, we have to challenge us too and say, hold on, slow down, explain yourself. And I don't think there's ever a problem with saying, could you explain that again? The way you
Yeah.
did explain that, I didn't actually understand what you're getting at. Could you say that again? And do that in an interview too. Don't ever be afraid to say, could you phrase that a different way? And I know a lot of this has got to do with confidence. And Adrian was saying as well, you know, you sort of beat yourself up. The amount of mock interviews and discussions I've had with international students that have felt like this big, like, oh my God, I can't speak. I won't, you know, the interview, I'll put myself across wrong. I sit and do a mock interview with them. I haven't had to ask them to repeat themselves. I haven't misunderstood them. I haven't been able to understand their accent. I think a lot of that is your own worry that you're not going to be understood, when actually you are, and sometimes your mind takes over and makes you feel anxious about that. But if you are worried about it, then I'd really encourage you to get involved. Yeah, just go and play sport, or go to the library and join a group, or volunteer. Just things that you would do every day at home as well, so that you can actually just learn to speak, you know, more confidently.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Brigid. I love how you touched upon like volunteering and how that would open up so many doors. So are there any avenues that the students should look for, especially to, you know, take up those volunteering opportunities? And are there like any networking opportunities that are available as well for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't already heard of Volunteering Tasmania, I would tell students to jump online there. They have what they call Volunteer Connect, and you can actually plug in how much time you have, what region you live in, or what area you'd like to volunteer in, and it'll come up with local community organisations and not-for-profit charities put their volunteering opportunities on there. If you can't find something, you can call Volunteering Tasmania and they'll talk to you and see if there's something that they're aware of, and, you know, that sort of thing. So that would be my first protocol. The other one would just be, like I said, local clubs. So lots of people volunteer at their sporting clubs or, local organisations, you know, see what's in your community. Go for a wander. I used to say to students all the time, hey, you live in Sandy Bay. Have you ever just wandered up and down the streets and just looked at what organisations exist? That can be a really great one. Just wander around, see a name of something, go home and go, what's that? And just look it up. But I really do think, Nivi, that with volunteering, you have to do it with something you enjoy, because you get something out of it as well. And so if you're like really great, I've had students before that are actually really good at like graphics and IT, and they really want to use that skill. So they've just gone along to an organisation and said, hey, do you want me to do some work for you? And then they've volunteered using their skill for an organisation that can't afford to pay that, or don't, you know, so volunteering doesn't have to be what people think it is, which is going and making food for the homeless, or, you know, those really traditional views. It can be the fact that at the hospital where Yankee works, that they have volunteers that just go around the wards and talk to people who are lonely, or have the trolley and, you know, do the canteen or the hot drinks, or it can be a lot of different things. And don't underestimate that charities and not-for-profits also would love people with skills in administrative and database entry and things that you could get your foot in the door, just to get to know a local community sector organisation doing something like that as well.
Great.
And ask your other friends.
Yeah.
Where do you work? Where do you volunteer? Do they need anyone else? And also go and ask your course unit coordinator, whether it's TAFE or uni, what do you do to help your international students? Do you have any volunteering or extracurricular activities or internship or work experience? Some of your courses will have it, like the Cert 3 and aged care and others, and social work. Some don't though. So it's a bit harder. So you're paying, go and ask the teachers. Go and ask them what they know. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. My last question before we open up to questions from the attendees is about working in regional areas outside of Hobart and Launceston. What are the opportunities there? Because one, I understand that international students are not very openly keen to, you know, work in those areas because of the lack of their community presence in outside of Hobart and Launceston. So how would you motivate them to actually give it a go?
So here you go. I remember talking about this with an accounting student years ago, and he said the same thing. I don't want to move. I don't want to move. And I said to him, Bill, hey, Bill, how many are in your class? And he told me, 100. I went, how many are staying in Hobart? 100. I went, do you know what? Let's do a quick search. And we found 2 or 3 jobs on the Northwest Coast. I went, how many of your students will go to, how many of your college students do you reckon will go for those? None. I went, pretty good percentage then, haven't you? If you don't have to compete with as many people, because less people live in that area or want to move to that area, you're hard. So do the numbers game, but you got to also consider the fact that, you will have to uproot. You will have to find somewhere else to live. So do your research. that's my biggest piece of advice for anyone, whether they're an international student, domestic student, or if they're going to move for a job, do your research. Make sure, especially with housing the way it is, make sure that you know that you can stay. But look, I've just done that. So I've just moved. I've been lucky enough to keep my job at COTA. But I've moved to the Northwest Coast after living all the time in Hobart. There are that many jobs in the community sector on the Northwest Coast. Northwest Coast is a very regional, marginal electorate in terms of the government and federal election committee promises. There is a lot of money.
Yeah,
and there are also a lot of issues. So the Northwest Coast has one of the highest rates of educational attainment, poor educational attainment. So what I mean is Tasmanian students not staying on to year 12. And as Adrian alluded to, literacy issues and you know, we have a lot of ageing demographics in these areas as well. So, you know, there is a lot of opportunity. I would say even north and northwest more so than the east coast and the west coast. There's I don't think as many opportunities on the more east and west, but I think definitely northeast and northwest. That all the big not-for-profits that take students for placements at UTAS pretty much have offices in all those areas as well as Hobart and Launceston. So it might be even that you start there and then you might be able to then negotiate after a year or two of working and getting a good reputation to move back to Hobart or Launceston. So I think do your research, look on websites, ask around, and maybe a couple of you could move together. Make a plan for a few of you to move so you've got some friends with you. Yeah.
Great.
I don't know about you guys, if you've had many. I mean, I know that you moved, Yanchi, but, you know, I don't know if any of you know any of the other grads that have moved, Adrian, out of Hobart, or, you know, like, I know some people have gone interstate, but I know a lot of people like to stay here. There's, you know, ability to get the skilled migrant visa and all that sort of stuff. But I think it comes down to doing that research and not just expecting a job advert's going to land on your doorstep. You're probably going to have to network your way into a lot of jobs.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Yangshi or Adrian?
So when I first started, sorry.
Yeah, you go first. That's all right.
I'll go first. So when I started my job in Colony 47, it was a casual position. I was asking my boss if there's any possibility to make it full-time, to go to full-time, but they said that not in the near future. So I actually looked around and then I found out Housing Connect North, which is managed by Anglicare, actually had some positions for the same role and duty that I'm doing with Colony 47, but it's up north. I went for an interview too. I didn't make it at the end, but still, like they're really willing to accept people from different regions of Tasmania as long as you acquire the same skill set and you be able to show that you're willing to relocate. And they want to make sure that, oh, do you have any friends in Launceston? Are you okay with like moving up north, that kind of thing? And it's like, yeah, fine, obviously. And then, I mean, maybe I wasn't ready at that time with my skill set, but I mean, relocation wise, I think it was a strategic decision. And it really depends on what you want to get out of at that time.
Yeah, and also definitely I feel the same. Like in the north part of the state, you tend to get like they're more willing to give people who don't have experience an opportunity because they are like sort of more like they have more like positions, but because they are less like social work graduates, so they tend to struggle a bit sometimes as well. Like for example, like Relationships Australia, where I worked before, so they are like sometimes really struggling to get people like to do the, for example, family support, like practitioner or like family law counseling, like those sort of the role, because I think it's because there are not so many social workers living in that part of the state compared with Hobart. So what they do is like, although on the job description they like, or like the selection criteria, they expect you to, they say like, you know, you need some like counseling experience or things like that, but like because you have a social work degree, you can just let them know, you know, you have those kind of communication skills you learned from your your course, and they acknowledge that they count that as well. So they are very willing like to give you opportunities to, and because they're going to give you training as well when you started. So sometimes don't be scared by those kind of things, like, you know, if you have experience in this, experience in that, but even if you don't have that, just like have a chat with them to let them know what you have done at uni, what you learned from the placement. Sometimes people like, they say if you are, you know, you are a passionate, enthusiastic person, so you have good reference, they're more than happy to give you an opportunity as well.
And I'll just say, Adrian mentioned something that I think is really important. I think that quite often in my work with students, the expectation is the degree and the piece of paper get you a permanent job. And I think that you have to be really careful with thinking that way, because you've got no control over funding and what services get funding and what amount of funding. And that equates to how many jobs, essentially, because the work that we do is essentially human powered. It's with people. So we don't have big budgets for flashy things and products. It's the work and our ability to relate and working with people. So our biggest cost is salaries in the community sector by far. And given that, you know, quite often we don't get the sort of funding that we need, that's why jobs go up and down and the ability. There's always a need, though. There is always a need. But what Adrian was saying about taking a job that's casual, I think that you have to be really careful with your expectations. I think any industry now, it's rare to think that you're going to have a job for life. I think you'd all know that anyway. But I think that a lot of students and a lot of even my friends, and I mean, up until 18 months ago, I was doing 3 jobs, but that was by choice because I wanted to do different things with skill sets across a couple of different organisations. And my skill sets were able to be applied across those 3 organisations. And I think that quite often you might find yourself getting a job or 2 jobs, 1 part-time or 2 casual, or hey, guess what? You might work casually for us in community services and aged care, but you might also work in a restaurant 2 nights a week. And I think that's the reality of just general life and general funding. And I don't want you to feel disheartened thinking, oh goodness, I can't get a full-time job in social care or in aged care. It's actually because it's harder to do that now in this industry. So it might be that you juggle a couple of different jobs, which actually gives you some really great flexibility to develop skills across a couple of different areas and spaces, which helps to, again, build your abilities. So if you get offered a casual job, take it. Don't sit there waiting for the full-time job. Take it, get the experience, because once you're in with an organisation, other opportunities become available. And if they get another pool of money and they go for a grant and they've suddenly got funding to hire people full-time for 3 years, you've already been working there casually and you may well get that gig because they've already known you and you've got that network. So take the opportunity when it comes and don't be disappointed if it is casual and it's not a full-time gig.
Great, thank you. We're open for any questions. If you would like to pop your question in the chat box, that'd be great. Or if you'd like to ask the speakers yourself, you can use the raise your hand function and then I can unmute you from I can give you the permission to use your mic. So yeah, you can do that. We already have a question from someone who has just finished their Cert 3 in individual support disability and has also done their work placement in Hobart. They just want like any advice to start with.
Networks, disability, NDIS, there are so many providers. So my first question straight up would be, what research have you done? Who have you approached? Please don't sit there waiting for a job advert to pop up. We know that between 60 and 80% of jobs are not advertised. It costs $450 for someone to advertise on seek.com. And if you're a small disability provider, you're not going to spend your money on that. You're going to do it through word of mouth and getting to know people. So I would encourage you, get a resume together, go and look on the NDIS provider list that the government has. You just Google it. The whole list of everyone that's a provider will come up. If it is disability that you want to get into, start ringing, start picking up the phone, pick up the phone. My advice would be don't. And if you don't feel confident to do that, maybe email your resume and say, I'd like to give your office a call. What would be a good time so that you can work up to that? But really, it's about those personal connections. Up to you guys if you've got any other advice.
One thing I noticed is like if you already have sort of experience in disability support as a support worker, if you want to upgrade your experience, residential youth worker is always a good start point. I noticed they have recruited lots of people who have like background in disability support, and then like through being a youth worker, you are able to learn more like different skills and being able to open new doors for you as well.
And who would be some of the employers for that?
I know Catholic Care. When they recruit, because I went through the recruitment process with them, it's just I didn't take the job, but like I noticed they are very willing to take international students, new graduates, people who are working as casual disability support workers to get into their workers pool for the residential youth worker. So,
Yep.
and like that's really, really good experience to kind of just to upgrade one step more and to kind of open new doors and seeking different new experiences. Yeah.
Great.
I know Colony 47 do have some youth accommodation. So they call Colville Place and Mara House. And also yeah, you can for youth residential accommodation or for residential accommodation in general. There's also different shelters that you want to try to look at if they have any vacancies. But yeah, there is pathway that if you are starting as a disability worker or youth worker working residential, and also I know my friends, my former colleagues who worked there before and now move on to doing some more more like admin role in Colony as well. So yeah, there's different pathway. Once you get your foot in the door, it's easier to move between departments. Yeah.
And also, sorry.
Oh, you go.
Yeah, so one thing I noticed is the key assets. They have a casual pool just to as like children's casual support workers. Although they're not actively recruiting at the moment, but you can always just like express your interest to just get a registration with them. And so when they're starting to looking for people, they might contact you. And also like for the children's contact center, I know they're always looking for casual supervisor support worker, and they normally don't expect you to have a degree or qualification. So it's always a good starting point.
A good webpage I'd like to recommend is called Ethical Jobs. If anyone
Oh,
heard of that,
Adrian,
yeah,
you beat me. See, I taught you well.
yeah. So besides LinkedIn or Seek or Jora, I also use Ethical Jobs because most of NGOs they do post job ads there, and yeah, so a lot of companies and they have job new advertisements every day. And if you can filter your search, like if you don't just limit in Hobart area, if you can willing to go to regional Tasmania, there will be more and more. Yeah.
And I would also say if you're going to look on some of those sites, Ethical Jobs is great because you don't even have to say the type of job it is. It just brings all the ones in the charity, not-for-profit space. But if you're going to go onto seek.com, my biggest piece of advice is don't limit yourself by the title of a job, because like we've talked about, the transferable skills, like I've been called about 20 or 30 different things in my life as a social worker, like as in a title, a job title. A couple of times it's been actually social worker, other times it's been service coordinator or case coordinator or this or that. So if you just write social work down or aged care worker or disability worker down, that's how you identify, but that's not maybe how the job's being advertised. So it's much better to, if you want a job in the community sector and you're on Seek, just tick the box when you do filter to the community development and community sector so that you get everything that comes under that kind of heading, and don't put a job name in the top. And then just put the regions you want to look at. So if it's just Hobart or if it's all of Tassie, and then you'd be surprised at the names, but then don't look at them, click on them and look at the skills. Look at the skills and see what qualification you need or what kind of employability skills. And you might then find you'll do what I did when I looked at that career counselling job. I'd never thought of that, but all the job skills, I could do them all. And I thought, I never thought I'd be called a careers counsellor, but I could do them all. And so don't limit yourself by job titles.
Thank you. While we wait for other questions, I actually have a question to ask you. Are there like any mandatory certifications or checks that students will need to go through, or are there any that you recommend that they get?
Absolutely. So in Tasmania, you absolutely will need your Working with Vulnerable People card, which if you've done your courses and you've done your Cert 3s and you've done placements, you probably would have had to get. So all the students in our course have to have a Working with Vulnerable People card check through the Department of Justice, and usually also a National Police check. So they're usually the two. Some other organisations might want first aid. Some organisations ask you to do the Australian Childhood Foundation's additional online courses around children and trauma and things. There's no cost for that, but they might ask you to do that as part of your induction. So some organisations have things that you'll have to do to upskill once you've started there. But absolutely no questions asked, Working with Vulnerable People card, and also sometimes as well a National Police card, National Police check. Yeah, and I don't know if you've had any additional ones, you guys, since starting.
Get your Australian driver's license as soon as possible.
Oh yeah, sorry, of course. Yeah, you got to be able to drive. It'll be very hard. And that also limits you on placements too, because don't forget, if you're going to do a lot of work where you're working with people, you've got to get to where they are. and there's only so many times you can catch a bus. And in a lot of jobs that we end up in, we transport clients around to appointments or to take them places and things like that. And if you're covering a big area, and you need to get out to the back of Baghdad and things, there's not going to be a bus for you to go and see a client out there. So yeah, if you haven't already, and if you're finding that it's cost prohibitive, a lot of the neighbourhood houses have a driver mentor program, which doesn't cost any money usually, and they match you with a mentor that'll help you get your hours up. Yeah.
Speaking of cost to get those checked, it's also important to talk to your prospective employer whether they reimburse the cost. So I believe that when I start working with Colony 47, they say that, oh, once you're the preferred candidate, they can actually pay for my blue card, my working for the proper card.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the same with volunteering. Good point. So if you need to get most of the time, you need those 2 checks as well for volunteering, because again, we're working with vulnerable people, and quite often the volunteer organisation will cover those costs so that you're not out of pocket. If you're going to work in a health setting, you can also sometimes be asked to get things like hepatitis and tetanus and all that sort of stuff. And again, that can rack up if you're an international student and you can't get that on Medicare. So again, ask the question whether the employer will cover those things.
Thank you. Thanks. That's really useful tips for everyone here. There's like 4 minutes left in case anyone wants to pop in their questions or ask any questions. You have 4 minutes. But before, if nobody does, I just want to throw a question to both Yangshi and Adrian very quickly. I want you to talk to me about what's your favorite thing about doing your job? What do you like the best?
I think for me, it's like sometimes your people skill, your personality, you as a person is valued in the sector. Like, you know, when you are doing other jobs, you know, you have those kind sort of practical skills that's most important for your job. But as a social worker, like, you know, your ability to build relationship and like use your relationship with others therapeutically. So that's your core skill. That kind of give you a good basis to help people solve any other practical issues. So I think that's like, if you know you have passion, you know you are confident in your people skills, your skills to help others. This is like, no, that's kind of you as a person. I think it's valued. I think that's the most beautiful thing I think about being a social worker.
How about you, Adrian?
Most satisfying for me for my job or my sector at the moment is to look at whether my client actually achieved the ultimate goal, which is getting a social house. But also it's really great because it doesn't happen that often, to be honest.
Yeah.
But also it's important just to look at baby steps that they make as well, like how engaged they're with services, whether they've been referred to a good place, whether they have a transitional place and we're waiting for their social house. Like all of that matter, and whether they're at a better mental space. Because sometimes when people first came to us, they're really elevated and they feel really anxious about their life. But after the support periods can take months, and like after a few months, they're getting better, and it's giving hope. And like Brigid actually mentioned before, like when we work in this sector, we believe in changes in people, and we believe they're making them changes themselves, and we are just there to support them to go towards that change. So anything that looks less tangible, that can be manifested, but through our work, it's really great to see it happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Any closing comments from you, Brigid, before we end this session?
I guess I always think back whenever I get a bit despondent or if I'm getting a bit lost, and I always think when I trained as a social worker, one of the biggest tips that we got given, and I always fall back on now, is that concept that there is always a reason behind a behaviour. And I think as human beings, we are far too quick to judge people's situations, and we think, oh, they're homeless because this and this, or they're got this problem with drug and alcohol use because they've decided to do it or whatever. And that's not, no one lives in a silo in a vacuum. There is huge systems at play around everyone's lives, and quite a lot of the problems lie in the fact that many people in our society do not get the same start in life. They do not get the same opportunities, and then they don't get the same ability to have support along the way to make some changes and to be shown and to be supported to be able to live out what they actually would like to do. And I think It's really important to always remember that we're very privileged as social workers to be working with people at an extremely vulnerable time in their life, whether that's a health crisis or a family situation or a homelessness issue. And there is always reasons behind why those things are happening. And that's why I think we absolutely need to have passion and to have hope to work in this sector, because like we were saying at the start, it's not easy. It's a really stressful job, but it's also a hugely satisfying to see that somebody has been able to change their circumstance and their situation and has been able to go on and not need support long term or not need to rely on people because they've been able to put strategies and things in place, which has meant that they can actually be who they need to be. So I think, yeah, come back to that passion if you're really interested in this area and be really curious, ask questions. The worst someone can say is no.
That is such a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Brigid, Yangshi, and Adrian for joining us today with all your valuable inputs. I learned so much, so thank you for that. I'm sure our attendees have benefited as well. Just a reminder that this session has been recorded so far. So in case any of your friends couldn't make it, or if you'd like your friends to have to watch this recording, this will be on our resources page, which I've listed in the chat box here. So please go on to it. Possibly tomorrow, mostly maximum latest on Monday, it'll be up there. Thank you, everyone. And please subscribe to our newsletter for our next industry update, industry webinars and everything. So it's going to be in there. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the afternoon. See you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you guys.